I'm a huge fan of science fiction novels, and one of the subjects that come up frequently in science fiction is the question of, what would humanity's first encounter with aliens look like? Would humans finally begin exploring the stars and find an entire galaxy filled with life that we need to interact with, like Star Trek or Star Wars? Would those interactions be peaceful, or would it result in an all-out war? Would we be the aggressors like Starship Troopers, or one of my favorite science fiction books, Armor by John Stakely, waging a distant war against an alien race in the name of conquest? Or would the aliens visit us? Would they come to Earth peacefully and teach us something important, like Story of Your Life, where aliens teach humans a language that allows them to see the future? Or would they arrive on Earth and begin eliminating us like Independence Day or War of the Worlds? It's a question that has spawned an incredible amount of stories, and as we learn more about the universe we live in, it seems like they only become more widespread in media. In 1972, a book was published in the Soviet Union called Roadside Picnic. It was so popular that it was translated into a bunch of different languages and sold reasonably well in other countries. An impressive feat for something coming out of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, where very few things escaped across the Iron Curtain. Roadside Picnic explored the idea of what exactly humanity's first encounter would look like with an alien race. Rather than coming to Earth to conquer or destroy, or teach humans or even interact with them in any kind of way, Earth is treated like a pit stop, a place for them to pause in their journey, and is treated the same way as we would a rest area or campsite. Their visit to Earth is akin to having a roadside picnic, where they stop and eat, dump off their trash, and continue on their way. Just like ants would explore the campsite after we leave, in our world, humans explore the alien remains and roadside picnic in the same manner. Whereas humans would leave trash like wrappers and leftover food, maybe some things cleared out of their car or whatever else would be left behind, the ants wouldn't understand the use or meaning of those items. It could even be harmful to them. But would humans really care about that? The aliens in Roadside Picnic are exactly the same. They came to Earth and left, leaving behind things that are probably trash to them, but to us humans, these are items of incredible power and can be really deadly. Roadside Picnic spawned an entire subgenre of science fiction. What if aliens left things behind after their visit? Things that were so potentially harmful that they needed to be contained in some way. Maybe the entire location walled off and people are forbidden from entering that area. But what if some of those items were so powerful that there's this need, this greed to obtain them for either profit or power, and people risk their lives to enter these exclusion zones in order to obtain these objects? You may already be familiar with some of the movies or video games that are in the Roadside Picnic genre of science fiction. The Stalker video games come to mind immediately, a series that are a twist on the Chernobyl disaster, combining it with terrifying technology and monsters. Annihilation from the Southern Reach book series that later had a movie adaptation with Natalie Portman is another example. Although this one is more of a, what if an alien object landed on Earth and started to change things in this exclusion zone? There are so many examples of science fiction, horror, and other ideas that can be traced back to that book, Roadside Picnic. Exclusion zones that people aren't allowed to enter, where things mutate and change, and the things we thought impossible were suddenly very common. There would be anomalies, mundane objects that suddenly become something more than normal, incredibly powerful but also dangerous. There would be insane scientific experiments with world-ending consequences. Pacific Drive is a part of a long line of science fiction horror games that can trace their roots back to Roadside Picnic and the original Stalker games. I played Pacific Drive on the PlayStation 5, where it can be purchased for $29.99 US. It's also available on PC through Steam and the Epic Games Store. Pacific Drive started development in 2019 by Ironwood Studios, the debut title for this developer. They are based out of Seattle, which is apparent from the setting of Pacific Drive, being that the Olympic Peninsula is in the state of Washington and it features prominently in the game. The premise of Pacific Drive is pretty simple. What if something happened in the Olympic Peninsula that forced the government to wall off that entire area, preventing anyone from entering it, and more importantly, anything from escaping? The year is 1947, and a group of scientists are doing experiments in the Olympic Peninsula. Why are they doing it there? Who knows? Although it is hinted in logs that there are some strange stuff there that made them choose that location in the first place. Whatever they find there, or their experiments discover, leads them to create LIM technology, LIM technology. The government helps out, and eventually they do something pretty serious that leads them to create ARDA, ARDA, a branch of the government responsible for sealing and studying the phenomenon in the Olympic Peninsula. Things there get pretty bad, and eventually they wall off this large section to contain the radiation, the anomalies, and a bunch of other things. The first set of walls don't work especially well, and they have to expand them in 1961 and again in 1967 until a large chunk of the entire peninsula is a no man's land. They move everyone out and nobody is allowed in. Alright, so what did they find there? Who really knows? Pacific Drive never really tells you. If you are disappointed by that, join the club. A lot of Pacific Drive's story is like that, hints of the paranormal and world building that they don't really bother to tell you much about. The game isn't about discovering the truth of this area, or really learning much about the exclusion zone at all. The lore is just an excuse to build a bunch of crazy things and then they set you loose in it. You play as the driver who, you guessed it, drives. You're on a delivery to the edge of the exclusion zone when you're zapped into it. You wake up alone in the dark with no vehicle, and there's only the distant headlights of this old station wagon to guide you. You hop into that old shitty car, and you drive to an abandoned garage that's going to be your base of operations throughout the entire game. You don't meet any other characters, at least not directly. There are a few people left in the zone, but they only talk to you through the radio. The story is that the car is this anomaly, and will eventually drive you mad or kill you, so you need to help these scientists break the connection between you and the station wagon, so you can leave the exclusion zone. Is the car special in some way? Does it have cool powers? Not really, it's technically just a car. These scientists that you work with, they aren't great people. They have their own agendas. They want things from you in exchange for their help. You're going to help them discover some of the secrets of the exclusion zone, but they don't really share much about those details with you, or when they do, they keep things very vague. That's all I want to reveal about the story, except one final thing. The ending is pretty terrible. Like, objectively bad. It really explains nothing about the exclusion zone or the game, and nothing really changes for your character. It just ends pretty suddenly with no real build-up or tension, and then you can just keep playing the game over and over again through the end game. Let's dive into the gameplay. Pacific Drive is a roguelike survival game. It has you doing runs, which consist of driving through a series of maps that it calls junctions to reach a destination. Once you accomplish your task at that destination, or reach the end of your plotted route, you collect orbs of energy called anchors to return to the garage. This garage is your home base and where you're going to spend most of your time outside of your car. This is where you're going to refuel your gas tank, repair any damage done to your car doors and panels, and charge your limited battery that drains whenever you use a special ability or drive with your headlights on. In your garage, you can craft parts for your car, starting with just basic tires and panels that damage pretty easily, to steel doors and rugged off-road tires. These crafted parts are going to be switched out a lot during your time in Pacific. Drive. When you repair a part too often, it's going to eventually degrade, and it's recommended that you swap it out for a newly crafted piece. That energy you collect in junctions to teleport home to the garage, you can also spend that on researching upgrades, new parts for yourself, the car, or the garage. Once you're all supplied and repaired, it's time to head out on the open road. Except, well, it's not actually that open. What you're going to do is you're going to select your destination from a map in the garage, and you can't really deviate from that map. You pick what junctions you want to go through on the way to where your mission directs you, but you can't go past that point. Then you just start driving. Each junction is this self-contained map that you're going to traverse, and it's filled with randomly generated roads, items, buildings, and anomalies. The overall map doesn't really change too much. You can still expect the same sort of things each time, but once you're in that junction, it's laid out differently every time. These maps generally have a few roads that crisscross around them, they have some buildings to scavenge for materials, and they have a few anomalies that are looking to take parts from your car or hinder your journey in some way. When you're on the road, your car's gas gauge drops pretty quickly, so make sure you bring fuel cans with you. Your battery drains if you have your lights on, so you have to use it sparingly, and make sure you bring something to recharge it with. And of course, your car will get beat to pieces if you drive like a maniac, with pieces degrading eventually until they break, leaving you exposed to the elements or driving with a flat tire or sputtering engine. In the levels, you're going to be looking for materials. Scavenging is this major part of Pacific Drive. You need scrap metals, rubber, chemicals, etc. to make new parts or to repair your existing ones. Some of the later missions even require you to craft certain items, so make sure you spend a lot of time looking for materials as you drive. As you go through the exclusion zone, entering the outer zone, then the middle zone, then the deep zone, the maps get creepier and harder, and the anomalies that you face get more numerous and strange. There's these stationary mannequins called tourists that explode if you touch them, and they move sometimes when you aren't looking and give you a pretty big fright. There are abductors that suction off part of your car, propelling you forward at extreme speed and breaking them. There are these pockets of intense radiation that sometimes they are stationary, but they're going to also cover everything if you spend too much time in a map looking for things, or when you try to escape it with a teleporter. Every trip is an adventure and a challenge to overcome. But it does get repetitive. There are only so many maps and they can only be arranged in so many ways. It also can get pretty grueling when you have to drive through 5 or 6 junctions to reach your destination, only to have to do the same run again to reach a mission just 1 junction further. When you're on a run, you can't save either. Each junction autosaves at the start in case the game crashes, but you can't exit the game quickly without losing a lot of your progress. That means that when you're planning your run in the later half of the game, you're going to need to plan to spend 20 or 30 minutes, maybe even up to an hour without quitting at a time. So if you're a parent or you're trying to get a quick game in during your lunch break, just forget about it. I will say that the game has a great accessibility system and a way of handling difficulty. Pacific Drive starts off at its hardest it's going to be, but you have the option to tune it down how you want to, with dozens of different options. Maybe you don't like that the headlights won't work without a battery. You can switch that option off so they always work. Want to not take damage or die or not lose anything when you die on a run? These are all options that can be changed. One of the first things I did was shorten the nights and make the nights brighter since I found they were way too dark, even with the headlights. I didn't like it, so no problem, just toggle it off. You can do most of the options without any effect on the game itself, except player damage, car damage, and player death will affect achievements. But don't worry, the game will tell you if you're about to switch something off that's going to disable the achievements. Honestly, Pacific Drive is at its best in the first 3, 4, 5 hours. After that, it gets pretty old. Doing the same runs, seeing the same things, or repeating the same actions in order to gather materials for an upgrade can be tedious, and I wish there was a way to either skip it or make it more interesting. Often in the late game, when you want to just see the ending, you're just driving as quickly as possible through these junctions because you already have enough materials or upgrades, and you just want to see the ending. If you're a careful driver, most of the time you're not going to take a lot of damage, meaning you can just cruise to your destination, provided you have at least a half an hour to do so. This is a good time to talk about the technical side of Pacific Drive. This game is janky as hell. Let's start with the bugs and crashes. I had a few game crashes. Luckily, they were mostly in the garage or at the end of runs, so I didn't lose any progress, but it will happen to you. Bugs include doors and parts randomly falling off, getting caught on invisible objects while I drive, the menus not letting me exit them without first switching to another screen, which will then let me close the menu. There's a bunch of minor nuisance bugs, but they add up really quick. Before anyone puts in the comments, these bugs weren't the car quirks. So to explain that, this game has a system where your car can develop these quirks. They're minor or major nuisances that affect the vehicle. For example, when the gas gauge is full, maybe the door is open. Or when you close your driver's side door, the passenger door opens. There are a ton of these quirks, and the game has a mechanic where if you guess what that quirk is, you can fix it. It makes it really interesting and changes things up to have a few of these quirks going off on your car, making you keep an eye on it. But the bugs I'm talking about weren't quirks, they were just bugs. But speaking of jankiness, let's talk about the driving. I would liken it to Far Cry bad. It's completely first person, often taking place at night or during rainy storms, making it very hard to see. You're going to be doing a lot of off-roading as well, and the car at the start isn't exactly built for that. You slip and slide everywhere. A lot of the janky driving is deliberate. It gets better as you upgrade your engine and tires, making you faster and off-road better, but the driving never really feels great, it just gets less awful as you upgrade. This isn't a Forza game or Gran Turismo. It feels closer to Far Cry, and that isn't exactly a compliment. And that brings us to the conclusion of another review. Is Pacific Drive good? Kinda. It had some good moments, but it also had a lot of tedium. The story and world building is really interesting, but the developer never bothered to do much about it, especially with its lackluster ending. It feels like they were just like, how do we end this thing? Screw it, here's something and we'll flesh it out in a sequel if we ever make one. If you enjoy survival horror games that require crafting, scrounging for materials, and so-so driving, this is a game for you. Just be aware that this is a 15 to 20 hour game, and the best parts of it are in the first third. I would personally rate it a 6.5 out of 10, and I would recommend that you pick it up on sale if you're going to check it out. Thanks for watching. I'm the Casual Console Gamer, and I'll see you all in the next review.